Hello and welcome to, I guess it might be session 30 of Mahamudra for the People. It's wonderful to see everybody who's here, looking in the text box. Um, yeah, wonderful to see everybody. And for those people who are new, this series of sessions that happen every Friday afternoon are a place through which I teach on Mahamudra in a varied way, using a variety of texts, and some are kind of classical, some are kind of perhaps a little more experimental. But the gist of this and the root and intention is to be able to provide background and guidance for people as they enter into the practice of Mahamudra. And what we typically do is we start off with a certain amount of time in silent practice, and we're going to do that shortly, and usually for about 12 minutes, 12, 13 minutes. And so if you can, we're going to start this way, so allow yourself to be seated or laying down, whatever is comfortable depending on your body and the needs of your body. Allow yourself to take a couple of deep cleansing breaths. Inhale. Actually, I'll teach a breathing technique that Bokram Che taught with respect to beginning Mahamudra practice. So if you can't see my hands because they're on my knees, but what one does is you have your hands on your knees, just open, and as you inhale, you close them over your thumbs, so you have fists on your knees. So as you inhale white light, and this could be akin to the light of Vajrasattva, so this light of purity. And as you exhale, you open your hands. You exhale, and then inhale, hands over the thumbs, exhale, out, inhale, exhale. And so this process is really rooted at, inhaling the primordial purity of mind, the essence of Vajrasattva into us. Exhale, sluggishness, discursiveness, intense emotion. And just as in Vajrasattva practice, that exhalation, you can visualize like a black kind of gooky kind of, schmutz, Vajra schmutz, either being breathed out or kind of almost like extruded out of your pores, right? So that this is just dissipating, right? The gunk of being trapped within this dualistic kind of situation that we're in is being expelled. So inhale, exhale. Inhale, hold, and exhale. Now, so you can do it like that, or you can also inhale white, hold, let that breath, while it's being held in your lungs, be red, and then exhale blue, which is basically this kind of, so you could say like minor Vajra breathing, where we're inhaling the white, and the white represents the enlightened body of kind of embodiment itself, awakened embodiment. Holding, and that's red, representing enlightened speech. Exhaling, blue, exhaling, enlightened mind. And you can, do the same thing with your hands. Inhale, exhale, on your knees. So this is a nice way with both of these techniques to come and settle into practice. And it's generally said that when we are able to engage in Mahamudra meditation and feel that there is effect, that the practice is unfolding. Sometimes they say that, especially if we're able to kind of touch into this kind of experience of mind, or this, experience of non-duality, that is typically an indication that the winds are beginning to enter into the central channel. Right? And so sometimes this Vajra breathing is a way of kind of gathering and letting all these winds settle in our body. So I don't know about you, I'm not feeling that way today, but sometimes, given kind of the frenetic nature of some of the work that I do, things tend to be kind of moving all the time, undulating, kind of crisis after crisis, and stuff like that. And so, mind can be, the experience of mind can just be very fast, right? And when we settle down to practice, when we don't have techniques like these, we bring that busyness right into the practice, which is not a bad thing, but it's something then, we need to be kind of realistic about to some extent, that we're going to be experiencing that. Allowing this kind of breathing, for lack of a better term, breathing technology to assist us, this helps to settle everything before we practice. Right? So, for this practice session, let's take a little bit of time, and I'm going to, just ask that everybody do 9 of these inhalations and exhalations. Our bodies are all a little different. Our capacity for retaining breath is all a little different, and so I'm not going to time it or anything, or say inhale, exhale. I'm just going to trust you to do it, and trust you to pick whichever kind of methodology works. The inhaling white light, extruding, exhaling, this kind of gunk, or inhaling white light, holding red, exhaling blue light. And so we'll do that, and then move into about 12 minutes of Mahamudra. Slowly bring yourself back to this group. Okay. It's lovely to see people from all over the place. Columbus and Oklahoma, I think, Texas, North Carolina, Maine, and London. I want to start off by seeing if anybody had any questions. If there are any questions, feel free to, uh, you know, ask a question down in the question. Yes, Spain, and also, you can ask questions in the chat box. So I've been thinking a little bit today, leading up to this, about technique, and I was thinking that it might be nice to go over some traditional technique. I feel like that might be nice. Mahamudra is one of these things where we don't want to solidify too much what we're the discussion, so to speak. Right? We don't want to etch everything into stone. Hello, Loring. We don't want to crystallize everything too much because Mahamudra is a practice of remaining pliant and free and flexible and open and yes, having the ability to hold and receive or receive and hold, and then to hold very lightly as if we're not even really touching that which we're holding, and allowing that which is being held or touched or experienced to arise and do what it does. And part of the practice is remembering that piece in particular, that we're not supposed to, it's not like we're running around with a butterfly net trying to catch a particular experience, or trying to rest into the experience of openness. And so while I've been teaching to some extent from the Flight of the Garuda by Shabkar and some other texts, I'm going to kind of now fasten the seal a little bit by teaching from Ninth Karmapa's text pointing out the Dharmakaya, which is the shortest text on Mahamudra written by Ninth Karmapa. The middling length one is called Eliminating the Darkness of Ignorance, and the very big version or text, I don't have it nearby, but it's called the Ocean of Certainty, or the Nyeden Gyatso. So, and these great teachers, and actually Bokar Rinpoche shortened the Nyeden Gyatso. There's, it's called, I think it's called the Ocean of Certainty is his distillation of the Nyeden Gyatso, and we can touch into that a little bit as well in the future. I received all the instruction on that from him, and then actually a number of years ago when I was still running Gyaltsab Rinpoche's center in Brooklyn, the abbot of his monastery was traveling in the States and came to visit and gave the transmission for that text in Brooklyn, which was exciting because it's not something that he typically does. So that was very special. Um, but in any event, so in the most classical sense, this practice is the practice of shamatha and the practice of vipassana. The shamatha and vipassana are maybe a little bit different than we may find in other contexts outside of Mahamudra. Um, and it'll take a little bit of time before we get to the vipassana piece. And we will, though, get to the the shamatha part of this. But first, I want to focus a little bit, very briefly, on what are considered the preliminaries for this practice. Oh, now this is sorry, Jersey. This is not the this is not the last session unless I didn't get the memo. Maybe it is. Maybe I'll die next week. Okay, so it starts off with the preliminaries. And so, with respect to the preliminaries, there are a number of, there are two main preliminaries. The first are called the general preliminaries. Right? And so this is the kind of thing we can actually begin each session with, so you could start off with either one of those breathing techniques. I'll try. So either the inhalation of white light, exhalation and extruding of negativity or dullness or obsession with discursiveness, exception with results, right? Chasing after results. Being good in practice, all of the places where we get tripped up. So inhalation, inhaling white light, exhaling that which is to be given up, or inhaling white light, holding red light, and then exhaling blue light. So you can begin with that. And then we move into the preliminaries. And I've kind of done this a little bit, a couple times with everybody here. But the general preliminaries consist of the contemplation on the difficulty of finding a free and favorable circumstance with respect to practice. That's the first one. The second one is a contemplation on death and impermanence. Even though I made the joke that, perhaps next week I'll die, that's what happens, death and impermanence. The moment, it's a little kind of maybe rote now, but the moment we're born is when we start to die. We don't know when that will happen. And so, the one thing that humans are really good at is assuming, it's going to happen later, right? So I spent a few years, 3.5 years or so, working in hospice and home hospice, and it's a great way to kind of learn how to appreciate death and impermanence by being witness to it and being present, and learning to be a support within the context of death and impermanence. Contemplation on karma and its results is the third one. And so, basically, to some extent, everything that we end up experiencing is, the good, the bad, and the in-between is a result of karmic seeds that are kind of, as the causes and conditions in our life experience align for them to be able to arise, they arise, and we experience that, So things may be going very smoothly, and then they go terribly, or smoothly, and then kind of blank, like dull, and then bad, or bad, and then well, or bad and bad and bad. But the kind of large point of this is the unreliability, right, of being in the samsaric um, experience, right? That everything feels really good until it doesn't, and then everything's really bad, and we're working to make it good, and then it's good, and then it's bad again. You know, the fourth one is contemplation on the faults of samsara, and so this too is kind of a deeper recognition of the nature of samsara, that it is unreliable, right? It is not to be trusted, right? So I don't know if anybody here who even let's say sometimes like we want to see change happen. Sometimes we want to see our own change happen, change within us. Sometimes life feels dull, and so maybe we put a lot of time into work. Okay, like maybe if I really kind of slog through this, then I'll get a promotion and things will be better, and then I can, whatever, buy a car or a house or whatever, and that might happen. And then when you have gotten to that point, then you kind of recognize that, oh, like, it would be great to then have more, or maybe you take that promotion and the workload is just, it sucks, right? It's like too much. So there's this sense of unreliability, and I'll get into all of these to share, some of kind of the traditional way of, these are explained. So, with respect to the contemplation on the difficulty of finding a free and favorable situation, right, where we are, the very classical, Buddhist description is that it's much like having a yoke, like the yoke that goes around an ox, right? And attached to the yoke then is either the rope or kind of piece of wood attached to a cart, right? So imagine a wooden yoke floating on the surface of the ocean, and a sea tortoise coming up from deep to the surface such that its head comes up through the yoke. So that's how rare human rebirth is said to be. Right? So this is a Buddhist metaphor. Now in this text, by Karmapa, it says, like beans sticking when thrown against the surface of a wall. Right? So when we throw beans, do they stick to the wall? Like typically not. Like a turtle that surfaces once every 100 years, sticking its neck through the hole in a piece of wood that has been cast into the great ocean. Or like finding the Udambara flower, this kind of mythological flower. Though not completely impossible, finding a free and well-favored human birth is as rare as these examples. Therefore, it is difficult to find with respect to example. So, he advises us, to think that, this present birth, which I've found, is difficult to find and easy to lose. Right. So, this is something we see, especially now, in times of COVID, where many people are losing their life. Right? This free and very hard to come by precious human rebirth is, for many people, it's just being kind of extinguished by this pandemic. And Karmapa says, if I waste my present human life, when I'm born in the next life, in the lower realms, I will be trapped in a hole from which there is no escape. Sometimes my life feels that way. I must not waste my time, but with strong effect must apply myself to practice to enter the path. And so he suggests making that kind of aspiration, right? That we should not take this for granted. So, and I definitely do not mean this in a like judgy or patronizing way, but like, yeah, just considering today, like, from the moment we woke up to this moment, how much did we appreciate this particular existence? Right? Appreciate and understand that, the rarity of it and the full potential. In the Uttara Tantra, we see that, this is where we learn about Buddha nature, right? That all beings have Buddha nature. And as a result of that, all of us have this spark, this fundamental awakening is a piece of us. And, how many times this morning since waking up have we recognized that, celebrated that, appreciated that? Right? And then how much of the day was spent completely kind of, unaware, or, we forgot, or, just not paying attention at all to fundamental Buddha nature. Yeah, well, yes, so Lorena says, it occurs to me that this idea is similar to how Christians talk about living a good life on earth so that we might earn a place in heaven. And in a sense, it kind of is, except the practical kind of side of this is that the more that we're able to appreciate, right, our fundamental basic purity, the more we're able to come into direct relationship with that in the practice, right? So, in a way, it is an incentive. I mean, everything's an incentive when the options are remain stuck in our ignorance and be lost in confusion, or appreciate all the opportunities around us so that we can then exert ourselves in practice so that we can get free, right? So in a way, it is an incentive because, if we're going to be totally honest with ourselves, most of the time our actions, our activities are, middling to not so great with respect to, how we truly not only appreciate, but are actively working towards the cultivation of all of the circumstances necessary for awakening to arise. Right. And so, of course, then Ninth Karmapa says that we should, turn our mind to Dharma as much as we can. Right. So this is why. So, like, worst case scenarios, like we're like, man, like I'm gonna do that later. I'm gonna, and not even, in this life, I'll just collect all the pechas, all the texts, so that in the next life, I'll know what to do. Yeah, absolutely, Lorena, I agree. So the second is the contemplation of impermanence, and sometimes, like the easy way of doing that is, who's ever met anybody who's 200 years old? I haven't. The fleetingness of this life is so apparent, and as is, and it's demonstrated even, very practically. Yes, even practically, like it seems like sometimes a flash happens between these sessions. I particularly enjoy Mahamudra for the people, and it seems like, it's like one day goes by and it's a whole week. All of a sudden, I'm getting on a crowdcast. So this impermanence, however, it's not just us, right? It's everything. So Karmapa says the outer structure of the world, as it arises first, it arises at first, it exists in the middle, but in the end, it will be completely destroyed. With nothing remaining. So he writes past and future time as well. Morning, afternoon, noon, night are all not stable, not even for a moment. The seasons as well, right? Winter, spring, summer, autumn. The change is constant. So, this is a good question Lorena asks. We should all be working towards being lamas or renunciants then, perhaps? What's the point of anything else? Well, so, I mean, this depends on how we define being a renunciant, right? And yes, a social worker. I'm a chaplain. Um, so the point is, though, and what I find very fascinating about this question is that this text was written, I want to say probably 300, 400 years ago. So there were not social workers as we know them even in the West. Um, the yeah. So my point is though is that the what is being described here is the basis of reality is impermanence, right? None of us will last long, right? Any one of us could die next week. Any one of us could become ill. The world may not be around in 100 years, at least in a way that's inhabitable, right? So that's real. The difficulty in finding, a situation through which we can practice Dharma, that too is difficult. Right? So this is just about the existential spark as practitioners. That has nothing to do with the outcome. Right? Just because this was written by a monk doesn't mean it's about the generation of monks, regenerating the population of monks and nuns, etc. Right? This is about escaping suffering. So you can escape suffering as a mechanic, you can escape suffering as a social worker, you can escape suffering as a doctor, as a delivery person for a restaurant, as a chef, as a prostitute, as a pimp, as a drug addict, as a concert pianist. Like the range is nobody's. I'm not questioning the range. And actually, the tradition doesn't even question the range, too, because there's a considerable amount of literature with respect to the outcomes, right? How people have played out practice, right? So there is a book, great book called Masters of Mahamudra, translated by Keith Dowman, that tells stories of a lot of the great Mahasiddhas of medieval India, who manifested awakening through Mahamudra through their various positions in society. Right? Yeah, and our society isn't necessarily the most conducive to um, realization. However, um, you know, like many things, if we give that which is difficult a lot of energy, it remains difficult. But if we're able to recognize that while everything is messed up and busy, right, the only person who can truly liberate our own mind is ourselves. Right? So we can use the Dharma, the instructions we receive from teachers and all of that, and that's essential, right? But the the main point is to become liberated and to be able to be a guide to others. And the community piece is hard. I mean, congregational Buddhism, the way it's practiced here and now, is not the way it's practiced in monastic settings. And monasteries, yes, there are times for congregational ritual practice, right? But monasteries are very busy places. The kitchen work is grueling and long, and many monasteries they still cook with wood, right? So there's gathering the wood, there's burning the wood, there's Gyaltsen Rinpoche's monastery. You know, that's a lot of work. So the people who work in the kitchen are basically working from morning to night and are exhausted and wake up and do that the next day. the community piece, I think, feels like a given in the U.S. in particular, especially because congregational faith, especially congregational faith with respect to the way Buddhism is practiced here, tends to be based on church models. Right? And so I think for me, the larger point is not necessarily the external circumstances as much as being able to be firmly situated within oneself, because that's all we can take responsibility for at the end of the day. So even with Bhumi Sparsha, it's a lovely sangha and it's flourishing and growing really beautifully. And this point about impermanence is, really rings home the fact that, that too is impermanent. This is the kind of, bittersweet part of existence. It's all temporary. Right? This world that we look to tend, that too is temporary. So the point of this is to recognize, again, the constant changeability of the world around us, as well as the world within us. And then the third is the contemplation of karma and its results. And so, this is basically, kind of bringing us back to understanding the impact of our actions, that our actions, have an impact, right? And so we can go kind of, blithely through the world, just trying to accomplish all of our goals without any regard for how it impacts others. And that has an effect on us, whether we are aware of it or not, or can accept it or not. And so if we are truly striving for awakening, then it behooves us to take responsibility of ourselves, for ourselves through our actions. And Lorena, I get your point. So Lorena asks, I'm just wondering if having a good foundation might come from living in community, might accelerate or help foster our capacity to stay present rather than trying to decondition from samsara within the cradle of the beast. I may just want to hear that I should run away to a monastery. So I hear that. And I'll give you an example from my life. Well, yeah, and Melissa, I've met Melissa while she was living in a Dharma center, and she can, I can attest to her comment just below. So, in my particular case, I had not really, I only stepped foot in a Dharma center maybe 6 times before starting one. My practice has always been very solitary. Yes, I would go to, Asia to see my teachers and do retreat there. But even then, I would see my teachers, receive instruction, and do the most crowded any of my retreats were they were with one other person. And so, there were a number of cases where I spent a year, year at a time, right, in India. And some of those times I had, close Dharma brother with me. And some of the times it was just me by myself. And I don't mean to say at all that should be preferred over anything, right? But that's just the way it unfolded for me. So, in 2012, I opened, New York Tsupa Gosho Dharma Center for Gyaltsen Rinpoche. It was open for 5 years. That was the first time I really did anything in community. And in the years before that, from about 95 until then, the only times I went to Dharma centers was to deliver letters, things like that, from teachers in Asia to the teachers who were teaching. So I don't see it as necessary, and I don't know if I would ever run or be part of a center or something like the physical brick and mortar thing. I'm not. I think what sparks me is people's practice, and what I know from my practice is that when we have the instruction, when we create the conditions, in our life to be able to go deep, not much more is needed. But to each their own. There's no right way. But I will suggest for those who are interested, checking out Masters of Mahamudra. Um, I will write it down. Um, um, so, okay. And so then the faults of samsara. So, samsara is inherently an unreliable source of refuge, right? It can seem good. It can be, in like we could take like, my own experience with work. Like I in chaplaincy, like I love chaplaincy. It is incredibly meaningful, and it's a place where practice meets activity in the world. And being a chaplain is to hold a job function, right? And so whether it's a hospice or a major city agency or a hospital, the vicissitudes of those work environments become part of the experience of being a chaplain, right? And so even though one can be very passionate about benefiting others with respect to providing spiritual care and pastoral counseling, when the hospice is like, we got to increase our census so that we can be making more money, and everybody needs to see more people and spend fewer, less amount of time with people, then you need to do that, right? Or the hospital is like, oh, we need to cut the budget for our pastoral care department, which means we got to get rid of some chaplains, which means everybody has more work. It's unreliable. Everything is unreliable. There's suffering in birth, there's suffering in death, there's suffering in the bardo. We're kind of running around trying to find creature comforts, running around. Even when you look at this, yes, yeah, thank you, Payne. When you look at this past election, that was a great demonstration of the sufferings of samsara. Everybody feels that they're right. The left, the right, the center. Everyone's fighting. They're battling. It's causing pain, suffering, anxiety, and it's very transient. So, these are the four general preliminaries. So, how these relate to our practice is that, again, as I said before, if you can, spend a little time contemplating the preciousness of human rebirth, death and impermanence, karma and its results, and the faults of samsara, that helps us to be able to kind of come back. This is really the why, right? The why we're coming to practice. Now, we don't always technically probably need the why, right, to address the why. However, it's very easy to get wrapped up in practice and wrapped up in commentaries and wrapped up in expectation and wrapped up in, I can't wait until, years down the line when I'm teaching in Bhumisparsha and, blah, 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 blah. And that's great. And I celebrate, Bhumisparsha getting to the point where we're kind of generating teachers. And that can't happen unless this very central primordial why, as to why and how we come to Dharma practice, is kept alive. My root teacher, that kind of drove home again and again and again the fact that she came to Dharma because she was suffering. She came to Dharma because her life was on fire. And she told me at one point, she said, that is how your practice is pure, when you know how you're suffering, when you know why it is that you need to liberate yourself, right? When everything is all good and we're just chilling and we're just doing Dharma because it feels good and all this stuff kind of feels like it's falling in our lap and we don't have to work much for it, that's actually not a very good place to be. It looks awesome. Oh my God, look, this person has so much Dharma, they have all these blessings and all that, but they're kind of like, yeah, that's cool, but, I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to practice it, and, I got this other stuff going on. That's actually a terribly tragic situation, right? Because the person who is suffering doesn't even recognize that, right? So I'm not saying I wake up every morning and I sit down and do this in a formal way, but I do on a very regular basis contemplate my suffering and my unhappiness and my, everything, my anxieties, my fears, my frustrations, all of that as a way of coming back to why this is important, you know. And so those are the common preliminaries. The uncommon preliminaries are basically nunjo practices. And so the nunjo practices, consist of taking refuge and arousing bodhicitta. So that includes the recitation of the refuge prayer, doing prostrations, like full body prostrations, and taking the bodhisattva vow. And then the practice of uh, then there's the practice of Vajrasattva, so the visualization of Vajrasattva at one's crown, the recitation of the mantra, and this kind of the light, from Vajrasattva coming and purifying, all of our obscurations. Right? And of course, that's much more profound than that, right? The essence of Mahamudra is really the essence of Vajra mind, the purity of mind, purity of all things, this kind of non-dual, crystal clear purity that arises, that exists, throughout all appearance. And then mandala offerings. Mandala offerings consist of the practice is a practice of making these kind of symbolic offerings. They're kind of different heaps of rice that are kind of dropped onto it's called a mandala plate, and sometimes that rice can contain precious substances, jewels and gems, and grains of different kind. And this is really about the cultivation not only of generosity towards the field of refuge, right, and the universe, and everything, appearance, but then also the accumulation of merit with respect to our ability to recognize mind as Mahamudra. And then the fourth is Guru Yoga. And Guru Yoga here is described as Guru Yoga which brings awakening quickly. And so the practice of Guru Yoga is a practice of supplicating, requesting for blessings from not just one's present teacher, but the whole kind of lineage all the way back to the primordial Buddha Vajradhara. And one can visualize tantric Buddhas as part of it as well, and you're really kind of fervently making requests for the blessings to descend much like, you know, I think it was 2 weeks ago when I was talking about devotion, right? That this is about engendering this openness and this receptivity to the experience of awakening. Right? Without the receptivity, um, you know, there's really not that much good that can happen. There's kind of on a relative level, there's some good that happens. However, um, you know, I mean, as is said in the Bible, right? If you throw, the whole thing with the mustard seeds, right? If the ground is too hard upon which the mustard seeds are thrown, they can't take root, right? They can't begin to grow and blossom into mustard. Right? So we need to be receptive. So all of these things exist as a mechanism or as a series of techniques to basically prime the engine, so to speak, so that it can work efficiently in our practice. And if there's interest, I could go through teaching these practices, one by one. That's something for people to consider if that's something that they would like. So these are the those are the common and the uncommon preliminaries. So Shane seems to have that interest, and perhaps Jessica does, and I'm sure some others might. So it's like coffee talk. You guys can talk amongst yourselves, and and let me know if that is what you want, and then I can take we could take a little bit of a road trip into into going into this, and if folks want, I could start this next Friday. So Lorena asks, is the ground not just the mind but also the environment? It is. However, okay, great. So it is, and yet how much responsibility can we take practically for changing the environment to the extent that is needed for awakening to happen before we die? There is this very fascinating kind of conundrum here. Like, it's not that one has to do things, sequentially, where we transform the environment and then we can practice, right? However, the truth of impermanence, right, and the truth of the limitations of samsara point at the fact that much of this is unreliable. Like right now, I'm incredibly fortunate. I have 3 children who are lovely, and I have a partner who is supportive of me and accepts all of the inanity and insanity that I bring, right? And I have, right now things are decent in terms of our ability to eke out a living in an expensive city. And I've been very fortunate to be able to have the relationship I've had with my teachers and the time spent practicing both, in Asia and here. And that could all change. The causes and conditions we can't always force. What happens if we have no access, very little access to Dharma? Right? That little bit of Dharma we're able to receive is only valuable if we practice. Similarly, like for somebody like me who's received tons of Dharma, that Dharma has no value unless it's practiced. Right? It's just not, it's not such that, I know teachers who will not give instruction to people until they prove themselves. And even with my present teacher right now, the teacher prior to that passed away, and I knew that, I felt a very strong connection to Gyaltsen Rinpoche. And it took about 2 or 3 years of me going back and forth between here and India before he committed to me. you know so even with that, and the committing to me was like, it's basically like, demonstrate, who are you, like, what are you doing, what's your practice, like, no, I won't give you anything, come back tomorrow. There was one trip where he did that for like 8 straight days. I was staying, it was like an hour away from the monastery. Every day I would, take a jeep, wait, nothing would happen, go back next day, go, no, Rinpoche's busy, and he knew I was coming, right? But this kind of like, I want to know that this person is hungry for this, you know, and how much support we need, is, it's hard. I mean, like, it's hard to say because, like, sometimes we look at things from the standpoint of, like, relative completion. So we'll see like a Dharma organization. We're like, oh, it should be like that. That's a great thing, right? But even then, like, those organizations have only been able to, they're not great, they just look good, most of them. And then the second piece is that those that are good by this long process of learning from mistakes and learning from failures, right? And so the the it's complicated. I think my general feeling is that if we can just receive the Dharma and practice, everything will change, right? Because it does, and we don't necessarily have to put a lot of, not that we don't have to put a lot of effort into it, but we don't have to work super hard at, quote unquote, transforming, the environment around us. I mean, there was one time, like, I was like, I think I had like 4 or 5 days left in Sikkim before I had to go back to Delhi and then fly back. And Gyaltsen Rinpoche was like, oh, okay, yes, I will teach you. I've thought about it, and you've come every day for, 7 or 8 days, and I will teach you, but, not the way you're dressed now. You need to dress appropriate for these teachings I'm going to give you. You need to wear Dharma clothes. And in many parts of India, well, every part I've ever been to, there is no store with a ready-made Dharma clothes. So then I need to, like, be like, all right, fine, like, hop in the taxi, go to the capital of Sikkim, go to a tailor. And the tailor is just a person who sews. You go to the tailor to ask for how much material is needed. They say, 6 meters for this, 3 meters for that. And then you have to go to the clothing store and then, have everything done and rush it, and, then he would teach. Lorena writes, sorry if I'm being obstinate. This is just something I've been thinking about again and again. No, I don't experience you as being obstinate at all, Lorena. I understand. And so, and so eventually I had to, like, pay more to have this thing rushed. And, on the last day, I got the stuff, wore all the Dharma clothes, went to go see Rinpoche, and he taught what he had to teach. And then I had to leave, and then, that was it. So where can we find the text of this particular text? So this, I think it has been translated into English. I will have to look for it because the one I have here is not really readily, or freely distributed. But I think Payne or others, possibly, I don't mean to out you, Sean, but maybe Sean has something. But we can look for it. I'll look for it as well and see if Okay, there you go. Shane found it on Amazon. The Amazon like realm of Dharma. So Kyle asks, how do you make sense of a teacher wanting a student to be hungry for instruction when a lot of our talks here are about ease and non-practice and non-striving? This is a great question. So the my interpretation of this is knowing that a student is hungry for instruction uh, is is rooted in wanting to make sure the Dharma is not wasted, right? So now I will say this: Western people do not have a good reputation at a lot of monasteries in Asia because, especially Americans, because the feeling is that all they're doing is collecting shit. Oh, do you have this? Do you have that? And I even get like a lot of people who are like, oh, give me the transmission for this. Oh, do you have this? Oh, do you have that? Oh, do you have this? And after a while, you're like, well, I just gave you 5 things in a month, right? And you're telling me you're having trouble practicing, right? So this kind of being hungry for instruction is two things, right? It's that, and this doesn't have to only do with Dharma, right? It's the same way, if one was teaching somebody a trade or teaching somebody, an art, right? Like you want to make sure that the person that is engaging in this is ready, right? Is committed. If you're going to then really be wholehearted in your work as a teacher, right? Because it's a lot of work, it's a lot of commitment, and it's a lot of there's a lot of energy involved and holding that space for people, for practitioners, but then for people who are training to be artists or training to be a writer, for example. A good teacher is somebody who journeys with you in your process and in the sense of Dharma practice, journeys with you in your practice, right? If it's the kind of teacher who's like, yeah, I'll give it to you and I'll see you next year, like that's kind of not really it's not really the best relationship. It's better than nothing, of course. With respect to having ease and non-practice and non-striving, that goes for, so some of that is sometimes the nature of the relationship. You want to test the relationship to see what's there, right? If the relationship is tight and feels like the connection is good, you can ease into this kind of sense of naturalness with respect to the relationship. After like I passed Gyaltsen Rinpoche's test, the sense of intimacy with which he would open up to me and teach within was quite stunning. Here's somebody who's known to have a bad temper and doesn't have many Western students, and was taking me on as a student, and basically sharing his time and his energy and his food and his knowledge and his practice and all of that with me, right? Ease and relaxation and non-striving is essential for Dharma practice, but so is an aspect, a certain amount of diligence. And holding these two is something that as practitioners we need to be able to hold within ourselves and to work through that dichotomy. In Milarepa's biography, there's this story of him going to another teacher before he meets Marpa, and it's in Dzogchen, and he receives this very Dzogchen kind of instruction in not cultivating any particular thing during the day, not cultivating any particular experience, in the midday, not and then at night. And so Milarepa's like, all right, man, I could do that, and the teacher's like, great, finishes the instruction and sends Milarepa off onto, a bit of retreat. And when he comes back to see Milarepa, and Milarepa is just kind of like chilling. And the teacher's like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "Well, you said to, just not do anything in the morning, and that's what I'm doing. And I didn't do anything last night, and I didn't do anything during the day. And there wasn't that connection, A, and then B, there wasn't that sense of, you know, effort and relaxation. All Milarepa was in total relaxation. But we need the effort, we need the energy. Right? So even if one is preparing for a Mahamudra retreat, there's work to do. It's not just like, hey man, like I'm gonna just go to this Mahamudra retreat, and I don't even know if I should bring anything, or what's gonna happen. It's more like, I have, this like very rare opportunity to practice Mahamudra, and I'm going to go into this with everything I have, because I could die next year. I could die before next year. I want to be able to completely experience the fruit of Mahamudra practice. Why? Because I'm suffering. Because I need to be honest. I can't rely on these things around me to remove my suffering. I need to do it because I have pain and sadness in my heart. Right? Because I know maybe the family genetics, right, is such that there's a propensity towards, an early death. All of these kinds of things. Right? All of this comes together. Right? So powerful practice requires ease, but the kind of ease that is predicated on kind of understanding the complexity of our particular situation and the need to break through. But we can't do it well if we don't know our own mind already, and that also takes work. I might be able to make a secret copy of this, but I need to be a little careful about doing that stuff. So I'll see what I can do. So let me check the time. So the time is 3:17. Okay. So I'm going to get into the particular points of shamatha. So let me just see Lorena's question here. So Lorena says, I get the hoarding mentality completely. The teacher wants to know how much the student really wants to learn. That brings up the question for me, or do we need to read a bunch of texts, or can we practice sitting with ourselves? So, the thing that we forget, and actually, I was talking to somebody about this recently, like, there is more Dharma available to us now than there has been available to any practitioner in the history of humanity, right? You go to Shambhala online, you go to Wisdom online, you go to, other publishers. I mean, there's the Terzo, Amazon. I have, oh God, I've got like hundreds of Dharma books, many of which are like secret, not for public consumption, never have been for public consumption. And you can just buy them willy-nilly. That doesn't make them accessible. The text is accessible, but the meaning is not always accessible. This is where we have to slow down. And I'm not saying this, as a teacher, like everybody needs to get in line, but it's important to recognize that book learning is not the answer. Book learning and intellectual exploration of the tradition can be very important. It depends on the person. For some people, that's like the last thing they want to do, and for somebody for whom that's the last thing they want to do, it's probably not necessary. For the person who is in a rush, and I'm not saying you're in a rush, Lorena, but there are people who have been, including Milarepa, in his life story. The amassing of huge quantities of books, collecting quote unquote secret dharma, and then trying to read them without instruction, without the wisdom of a teacher, is not the same as engaging in the process. It just isn't. I know this for a fact. I know this from my own experience. There are texts and practices that you can buy the books for, much to the chagrin of the tradition itself. And this is an interesting point too. We talk about it's a funny like reversal of values. When we talk about the respect, like respectfully addressing other cultures, right, and not taking the cultural values of another culture. In this particular context, I mean a culture of faith or a faith culture or faith tradition. By taking the values of those, and not necessarily respecting them, we can sometimes cause harm. And I think the thing that is complex about the practice of Tantric Buddhism is that many things that have been translated are technically not meant to be available for public consumption because of the complexity of the instruction, because with a lot of texts, there's a huge amount of oral instruction that has never been written down. And so you can read the text, but if you don't have the oral instruction, the text means a different thing than if you do have the oral instruction. And the oral instruction isn't meant to keep secrets from people, but the oral instruction is meant to enhance the experience, enhance the practice of the person who is ready, right? So I, definitely feel that within the context of, at least American culture, way too much of Tantric Buddhism is readily available and in the marketplace. And this isn't because I think it should be secret for any reason other than the fact that, when we begin to explore the experience of non-duality, we end up exploring the possible or eventual transcendence of dualistic rules and regulations with respect to appearance in the world. And that's controversial. That's not that easy for people to talk about. That's not, not a lot of people necessarily even have the maturity to talk about that, let alone experience that. I think the thing is, and the thing, so I enjoy, the thing I love about having traditional Dharma teachers in Asia is that it has forced me to submit myself. I tend to be, I'm a triple Aquarius and I'm an American, right? So I'm just like, fuck the rules, man. I don't want that. So that's kind of my thing. I'm fast. I want to I just want to get to the end. Rush. and my teachers have slowed my roll and made me work hard to wait, to slow down and do the work, rather than just be like, oh man, you bought all those translations and you brought them here and they're all good translations. We know that. We're going to give it all to you. So I like the term, and I kind of bring it up in modern tantric Buddhism, like this idea of slow dharma. Like taking it slow. Not because we lack capacity, not because I don't have faith in people. I have tons of faith in people. It's because we tend to rush, and I mean, I rush, somebody introduces a teaching to me, one of my teachers, the first impulse is to go out and just order 10 books, the best 10 books on Amazon, and then, read them. And some topics you just can't do that with. You can't. It won't yield any results. Yeah, and that is frustrating, I know. But so, that's my particular feeling on it. Other people, will have other feelings. And again, this is why my main teacher had this instruction to me, like, if you must read, read and forget. Because the other thing is that, like, the reading crystallizes things in your mind, and then you can easily become dogmatic, about the nature of mind. Oh, well, mind is vast. It says that. And then you're not even really cultivating the experience of vastness from your experience. You're just projecting a conceptual kind of framework for the way a mind should be onto the experience. And believe me, I also don't, I don't mean to sound anti-intellectual at all. Like I read and I study and I practice, and a lot of my time is spent studying, right? But it's also different to study when you have had the instructions, because then everything kind of becomes much more vivid. So I'm not saying don't read, but I am saying that there's a reason why almost every single Dharma text, at least in the Tantric tradition, tends to start with, homage to the Lama, or glory to the Lama. It's not because, the Lama needs that, but it's because that is a reliable source of Dharma. Facebook is not a reliable source for Dharma. Amazon is a reliable place to buy books and get them pretty quick, right? But for Dharma experience, that becomes a different kind of situation. So, it's going on the end of our time for today. So, the essential points of shamatha I will get to next Friday. And thank you, Sean, for putting up Master's Mahamudra. I appreciate that. And then I guess if there's a second, what Payne writes, is there a way to read tantrically, transforming the delusions of intellectualism? I'm thinking of some Song of the Vajra. Yes, there is. I mean, it's basically how to read things as a pointing at instruction, right? That's kind of the question. But given the nature of where we're at with respect to time, if you save that question, I'll get to it next week. So right now I want to dedicate the merit from any aspect of today's talk which may have been benefit to anybody, that any of that benefit I dedicate to, or let us all dedicate to the alleviation of the suffering of all beings. May all beings be able to recognize their mind as inherently liberated, vast, and free, without location, without edge, without appearance. May the Bhumisparsha Sangha continue to thrive, and may all of the practitioners associated with it, and all practitioners in general, be able to experience Mahamudra in this lifetime. So, thank you all very much, and have a good weekend, and thank you for your practice.